This past Monday, Jews throughout the world have lived through an historic moment. It was on Monday that the United States established the first embassy in the capital city of Jerusalem, becoming the first country to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's internal center. I come to you today to talk about what it is like to live through history, and I'd like to do that by reviewing 2,000 years of Jewish history very quickly. In the year 70 of the Common Era, approximately 2,000 years ago, we Jews ceased to be a people with our own land, with our own history. We went into exile as a result of the Roman destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And following that destruction, Jews for close to 1,900 years underwent a period of exile. Strangers everywhere, at home, nowhere, forever wandering from country to country, dependent upon the goodwill and the sustenance of those who provided us a haven. For close to 2,000 years, the Jewish people have dreamed of the return to Israel and to Jerusalem. In our prayers, we faced east toward the holy city. At the end of every Passover Seder and at the end of every High Holy Day service on Yom Kippur, we uttered the words, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. At the most joyous occasion in Jewish life, at a wedding ceremony, the bride and the groom would stand under the wedding canopy, and despite their great joy, they would take a personal moment to remember the sorrow of Jewish life as depicted by the destruction of Jerusalem. And in breaking a glass, they would make a pledge that they not forsake Jerusalem, they not give up the hope of someday restoring her. In our own age, in 1948, the modern state of Israel came into being. Alas, I was born about a year and 12 days after that moment, and yet I know for my parents and for my grandparents it was a historic occasion. They had witnessed an event that they had never hoped to see, that they had never believed possible, that the modern Jewish state could arise once again. But sadly, in 1948, when Israel declared its independence, and at the end of a war that lasted a period of just under a year, though Israel prevailed and though the Jewish state survived, we had lost the old city of Jerusalem, the center of Jewish life, the beginnings, the origins of our people. And so even in the midst of our celebration, we recognize the fact that our happiness was not complete, that our redemption was not yet done. Jerusalem still lay divided. In 1967, an event for which I was alive, I was a student in high school at the time, Israel, in a miraculous 6-day war, retook the city of Jerusalem. For the first time in 2,000 years, once again, the Jewish people had returned to their capital, and they established Jerusalem as the center, the heart of the Jewish people. And yet, sad to say, very few nations in the world would recognize this Jewish achievement. Of all the nations in the world, none maintained their capital in Jerusalem. None sent their embassies to what Israel declared its eternal capital, because Jerusalem was still an issue that was in controversy, still an issue to be negotiated between the parties who were part of the Middle Eastern conflict. In 1967, when Jerusalem was reunified, the hope was that someday the nations of the world would come to recognize what the Jewish people had long recognized, that Jerusalem was the center of Jewish life. Jerusalem was the eternal capital of the Jewish people. This week, this past Monday, after all of these years of waiting, the first government to establish its capital in the state of Israel, the first country to establish its embassy in Israel's capital, was the United States of America. Interestingly enough, I mentioned to you that the Second Temple was destroyed in the year 70. 1948 years later, precisely the date in which Israel was established, 1948 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, 2018, Jerusalem again became recognized as the capital of the Jewish people. I hope all of you were able to view the ceremonies that celebrated Jerusalem's recognition as Israel's capital. As I speak to you, a second and a third country are preparing to establish their embassies in Jerusalem. It is my hope that this marks the beginning of another new epoch in the history of the Jewish people. For those of you who were not alive in 1948, for those of you who were not alive in 1967, you will be able to say that in the year 2018, you witnessed a historic first. You witnessed the beginning of Jerusalem once again being recognized as the national capital of Israel and the Jewish people. Thank you.